Okay, hello. Thank you, Alexander, for coming on this talk. I'd just like to thank the elders of the land here, past, present, and emerging. I work with them, the Darug and Eora country. And thank you again for agreeing to talk with me. And yeah,
Yes,
I'll let you
thank
go
you
ahead.
for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually was really interested in your work because you do a lot of research on ancient civilizations, and I'm really interested in all those topics because there is a lot of like in Australia there are a lot of sacred sites as well. I don't know if you're aware of that, but yeah, there are proto-Egyptian types as well, and I really wanted to get into the ley lines like I was telling you about because they're all interconnected. So yeah, if we can talk about that and your book, because you seem to have a lot of knowledge in your book, that'd be really good.
Okay. My name is Aleksander Czeszkiewicz. I'm a Polish researcher and author, as you mentioned, of my book Deja Vu Has Everything Already Been, which is available on Amazon.com, in Australia, in many places on the entire globe. And I actually wrote that book when I was just 17. And
Oh,
because of some legal things, because I am from Poland, I live in Poland, I had to wait till I was 18 and then publish. And then I published it firstly in Poland, and then a year later I finished translating it and finally published it in English. So it is available both in Polish and English. And my story is very interesting because I started researching all of that at a very, very young age. I actually
yeah,
started, I've always been interested in, ancient civilizations, Earth, cosmos, universe, and stuff like that. But it was just, a broad area of interest. I was just watching some documentaries, reading some books. But during the middle high school, I was in the middle high school at that time, I attempted a few competitions, mostly historical ones, but also from other areas of knowledge, from other topics like biology, also English, mathematics. But
yeah.
it all started with my history competition because
Mm,
it was last year of the very existence of middle high school in Poland. It was to be eliminated. I was the last year of middle high school, and because of that, there would be twice as much people who wanted to go to high school because it was the last year of middle high school, and then it was eliminated the next year. So because of that, it was very hard to find like a good high school. So in order to go actually wherever I wanted, I decided to attempt a like very prestigious historic competition, like on a scale of the entire district in Poland. And if you like get a high degree in this contest, in this competition, you can go wherever you can and whenever you want to high school. So I
okay.
attempted that competition, and it was, I would say, very, very hard because I was at that time at the middle high school, like before high school and after elementary school. And in order to like achieve something in that contest, I needed to learn a lot about history from like levels above the middle high school, like from the levels of high school or even like university levels. So I started reading, and I needed to know everything from the earliest prehistory up until the modern times. And I was learning, reading and reading, and I was good at it. But at some point I realized, is it really everything we know about history? Everything was so clearly depicted. It was that first there were hunter-gatherers, then there was Stone Age, then there was Neolithic Revolution, after that there were the first civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, India, and that way we finally came to, like, through the Middle Ages to the modern world. And that picture looked like we know everything from those earliest times, and just, to be uncovered, there would be like only some minor details that are not that significant to the entire understanding of our history.
Mm,
Maybe we don't know something about a particular ruler and his reign and his years. Maybe we don't know about some event, but we know we have the blueprint. We know like how approximately the history happened. But I started digging deeper and deeper. I also started reading about the history of science itself. And I realized that we've been taking the roots of our civilization and the roots of our history back so many times that I think that we are too arrogant to say that what we know right now is the ultimate version of how our past really unfolded. So I started digging into that, and I realized that 500 years ago, which isn't, that long ago, just 500 years ago, we thought that the first civilizations are ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and we knew almost nothing of the previous ones like Egypt, Sumer, India, and we even thought at that time that humanity is like 5 to 10,000 years old. And before that, we don't know. Maybe there were some hominids. But then we started taking the roots of our civilization back and back. At that time we thought that the Greece and Rome are the first, but even Greeks and Romans were telling us that before them there were previous civilizations.
right.
They were describing, civilizations of ancient Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, Egypt, or even in the east, the India, and things like that. And we were totally ignorant. Scientists were ignorant. They had dimensions in those texts of earlier civilizations, of a much older history of humanity, but they ignored them. They mentioned that we do not have any evidence for them. And
Mm,
nowadays we think that the first civilizations were Sumer, of course, Sumerian civilization, India, Egypt. But
yeah.
actually I found out that all of these three civilizations mentioned that they weren't the first, that these civilizations, the roots of those civilizations were much older, like 30,000 plus years, not like 3,000 years BC, like modern paradigm is presenting us.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, so I was really amazed because, I thought, how can we be so arrogant that we are thinking, oh, we know everything, there were hunter-gatherers, then first civilizations and things like that, while all of those civilizations considered by us to be the first mentioned that they either weren't the first or that they were much older. So I started digging deeper and deeper, and I realized that ancient Sumer was discovered only in 1840s. It is less than 200 years ago. So
Oh,
imagine 200 years ago, we didn't know Sumer even existed. And now we say, oh, it was the first civilization.
yeah.
So I wondered if this is how our history of science unfolded, how science evolved. Could it be that tales of other lost civilizations like Atlantis, like Mu, or other like prehistoric cities, could it be that nowadays we also do not have evidence, like in the case of Sumer, Sumer was not like uncovered because people were not digging in that area? Could it be that our history is really much older, like ancient texts are telling us, but we just haven't discovered those civilizations yet? We haven't discovered the true and ultimate remains of Atlantis yet, or Lemuria, or things like that, but we have some maybe evidence that isn't the ultimate one. But when we connect the evidence, when we connect the dots from different cultures, when we see all of those tales that are telling us of a much older history, when we connect that with some anomalous monuments like the megaliths, about which we will be talking in a moment, or pyramids, or many other things like that, could it be that we are in the same situation like in the ancient Sumer? Even in the Bible was studied extensively throughout the last like 2000 years. And there
Mm,
was a mention that even Abraham came from the Sumerian city of Ur. But Ur at that time didn't exist because scientists didn't have the remains of Sumer. So
Mhm.
I think that we are very arrogant to think, like the skeptics, like the mainstream academia, that, tale of Plato is only, like of Atlantis, of course,
Mhm.
tales of Plato are only his imaginary, like ideal state portrayed in his dialogues. And I think that it is a big arrogance. The same as you mentioned with those sacred sites. We think that they, date to Middle Ages, maybe in some cases, maybe in some cases to just a few hundred years, when it comes to the mainstream academic point of view, of course. And I
Yeah.
think that we are arrogant and we are not listening to the people that know much more about those sites, like the indigenous people, than we are. Like the same situation I mentioned again in Sumeria. Ancient Sumerians were telling us that their civilizations is much older. Ancient Egyptians were telling us that ancient Egypt was much older. Ancient Indians are telling us that India is much older. Aborigines are telling us that all of those sacred sites are much older. But
Mhm.
now we as academics, we know almost everything. Maybe like I mentioned some minor details, and now all of those stories are fictitious. And one last thing to continue to those sacred sites is our understanding of mythology, because we think of because I think that it is the case because we have mythology of Greece, of Rome, of Egypt, and we really see some primitive thinking of them. The mainstream like point of view on myths is that myths are just primitive attempts of primitive people to actually describe real physical phenomena. Like they describe like some gods, and these gods have like lightning strikes. So mainstream things that they were describing like lightning strikes in that way, or that there is a myth of Phaeton, that Phaeton had a chariot and he burned all of the earth. So they
Yeah.
think that this myth is just, a primitive description of a comet. It may be, of course. I also think that it is to some extent, but I think that myths were, it was totally different thinking. And psychologists came to that
Mhm.
conclusions that we today think of everything as objective, as physical things that are measurable, that are physical, that are out there no matter what, that are objective. If I
Yeah.
see a thing and you're on the other side, you see a thing, we see the
Yeah.
same thing, but from different perspective, but it is the same thing when it comes to like three-dimensional space. But myths were something completely different. They were more about the internal states, they were more about like mind stuff, like
Yeah.
alchemy. Like alchemy was describing like the substance of sun, soul, and we are laughing today, sun has some like atoms in it, not like some substance, soul. And alchemists were describing that this substance, soul, was also in humans, like the third chakra, the this yellow chakra. And
Yeah.
they also believed that it was in gold, and that this soul is about perfection and things like that. They were
Mhm.
describing something different, something not of this physical realm, like some energies and stuff like that. And I think that it is the same thing with those sacred sites.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. You're very intelligent. Oh my goodness. I love what
Thank
you
you,
said.
thank you.
I love what you
But I
said about,
think that mhm.
yeah. No, you go on. You go on.
I think that intelligence, I started like treating intelligence as not something, intelligence is not all. There are many other levels of mind, but that is for another
Yeah.
conversation.
No, I love that because here in Australia they call it the dream time. So everyone
Mm-hmm.
has, like their own myth stories, like you said. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like what you said about psychology because there are deeper layers or levels of the physical reality, and everyone has a different perspective. So even though we're looking at the same thing, there are different things going on there. Everyone's got their own myth or their own beliefs, and that's a reality. It's not, I know that people think it's imagination or
Mm-hmm.
but it exists on some dimension, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if it
Yes.
holds truth to you, then there's meaning and there's something to say about that because we are multidimensional. It's not just one thing, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really
Yes.
like that.
Yes, I think that you mentioned the dream state and that psychological, like imaginary thing. I think that we should start with that and then go to to those sacred ancient sites because it is very
Yeah.
connected. You mentioned the Aborigines, the dream time, like before the physical existence, before the world, like everything was in a dreamy state, like everything was
Mm,
imagined into existence in some case. And nowadays we are like very, very into this physical realm, and we think that our imagination is just an imagination, like
yeah.
it has no power, and that, every like spiritual phenomena, I don't know, mystical experiences,
Uh-huh.
prophetic dreams, even dreams themselves are like hallucinations of our minds, that our
Yeah.
minds are thinking of those things, are, visualizing those things, and it is all internal. But as you mentioned, in Australia, there is this story of this dream time, but
Mm,
it isn't solely in Australia that we find this kind of thinking, and it is very connected with what I started with, and also with what we will talk later about. Because when it comes to this dream time and those imaginary thing, I even came to a conclusion that our physical reality and everything, the universe, may be a huge dream or imagination of what we would call God or the universe or the source. And it isn't only in the dream time, it isn't only in modern esoterica or my own thinking, but even Plato. Plato was first in the Western world to mention that everything came from the world of ideas. He mentioned that there are two worlds, world of ideas and world of physical manifestation. It is like a hologram. When we have like a projection of something, like at school in schools we have like those devices that are projecting onto walls or onto
yeah.
some things like screens, but they are projecting it on walls, like it is not a
Mhm.
physical screen like that. And it is like this in this Platonic world. Plato is mentioning that first there was idea of a human, there was idea of a horse, there was idea of a circle, and then it was projected into the material world, and we have like squares, humans, horses, and stuff like that. And he came brilliantly to that conclusion because when it comes to this reality, he actually he wondered that it isn't like ideal. This world isn't ideal. We
Yeah.
cannot have an ideal sphere. We cannot have an ideal circle because it will always be it like we've got pixelated like here on my screen. I can see some things. Maybe I can see a circle. But this
Yeah.
circle, if I zoom infinitely, it would be just a bunch of pixels and it wouldn't be a
Yeah.
perfect circle,
Yeah.
perfect
Yeah. Yeah.
round.
Yeah.
But the same is with our reality. Nothing is when we infinitely zoom ideally perfectly circular, for example, or
Mhm.
spherical, for example. And Plato, by observing that, concluded that there must be some ideal world. Because imagine that in our minds we have an idea of what is ideal circular thing. We have an
Yeah.
idea of ideal sphere that in our imagination is more perfect than the world because we can imagine actually an ideal sphere. We can do it easily with our minds, but we cannot
Yeah.
reproduce that in the world. So there comes idea of like craftsman, like of an architect that is trying to emulate those ideas to get those ideal things, like ideal maybe square, ideal circle, or ideal building, ideal like copula, or ideal column, and things like that. And a builder, an architect, artisan is trying to do the best he can, but he will
Yeah.
never be perfect. And Plato came to a conclusion that this world is like distorted, and it is like an illusion, and it is like not ideal, but there must be an ideal world because we can imagine ideal things. So he concluded that the world of imagination is the ideal world, and only the ideas are ideas. Oh, don't worry. Only ideas and things imaginary are like true. And he also came to this is called idealism, and idealism thinks that first before matter, as Plato said, there are ideas, so there was mind before matter. And
Yeah.
everything material, the physical world is just, a projection of the mind. Like I am imagining this circle, and now I'm creating in this reality. So Plato started the idealism, and it is very connected with this dream time, because in dream time we have mentioned that first there was everything was dreamy, everything was flowy, and then it started like being more dense, and now we have the material world. And but in this dream time and also in the aboriginal thoughts, I think that dreams are very important, and dreams are like real things. And it's the same with Plato. He mentions that imagination is real, and even maybe more real than the physical world and physical action. He also mentions that if ideas that we have are ideal to that extent that we can imagine perfect things, therefore God is also a mind stuff. God, the universe, the source, the absolute everything, like some higher thing, must be must be connected with mind. Maybe this God has a mind, or maybe he's even this mind. Maybe he is all that dream. Maybe he is everything of that. So it is very similar to this dream time, because Plato is telling us that the first there was idea, and from that idea, maybe from the God, like God was imagining things like our universe, and then he created universe, and that's how everything physical is. And in the dream time we have that first we have dreaming. Maybe it is dreaming of God or a collective dream. It can also be the same. And then we go and we have this material world. But it isn't only in Plato and in dream time, and it is much, much more. There is much more to it, and it is all connected with also those myths and legends and understanding them in a proper manner. Because just like Plato, just as aborigines are still thinking that mind is real, that those mental phenomena, that imagination, those dreams are real, or even, as Plato said, more real than the real physical world in which we live. So the same thing was in other cultures. And I think that the myths that are telling us of some like gods, like there are many gods in some religions, in some mythologies, they are fighting with each other. There's a deeper sense in that also, but it is all about this mind stuff. And
Mm.
it's all about, those things that we experience. We can have like, just as we experience a great movie, we have like the hero, we go through this hero's journey, for example, in a great movie that is, with story, with journey, we can have the same journey inside us. And we can also say that, throughout this journey we have some temptations. Maybe, this is like the dark force, maybe some like there is like god of war in us. It is all metaphorical, but it describes a much more real, like Plato said,
Mhm.
world that is before everything. Like everything comes from that world of ideas. We may not have every evidence from ancient Egypt, for instance. There are some monuments, some texts, but just as in the modern world, everything is mental. We are living right now, we are having a conversation. I am like talking somewhere else. People are having everything in their minds, and our
Mhm.
society is living in those minds, in those ideas. But 100 years from now, if we didn't record our ideas like in this recording or like in
Yeah.
some other materials, then 100 years from now, if we were lost completely, like a cataclysm happened, people like wouldn't know how we lived, wouldn't know how our life was and how everything was, because everything is mental. From the monetary system, like banks, like money, stuff like that. It is also, it is like an agreement between people and the state, and the same with other laws and stuff like that. We know that some laws are, written down, so we may know about them 100 years from now, but there are plenty of things. Everything is actually mental, and our ancient ancestors were more like intuitive, more into that, and less into the physical world of measurement, because they know that by like conquering and being in the internal state, and by controlling the inner mind, they can create the outside world in a better way than we do. Because as you mentioned, that intelligence, and I was
Yeah.
like, I'm not that happy about it, because
Oh.
imagine that nowadays we are doing most of the things from intelligence. And for instance, I have this camera, it was made by intelligent thinking, this computer, this thing, this is, this is all measured and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mentioned the artisan. And imagine that artisan, before creating the thing he wanted, like, going, like we nowadays, we do work, or many of us write some like academic works and stuff like that, just by going logically from A to B, from B to C. But imagine an artisan who has already a plan in his mind. As I mentioned, he had this ideal square, this ideal circle, or a sphere. Or maybe he have an idea of the entire building, and he can imagine it perfectly with everything. So I think that his work will be better than just like logical stuff
Yeah.
that is taken from A to B, from B to C. So this is also connected to art, of course, but also to like a higher degree of thinking, because I think that society has fallen down in like recent maybe hundreds of years, because nowadays, everything is logical, everything is
Yeah.
like not everything, there is art, there is beauty, there is nature, but our cities are like concrete jungles, and
Yeah.
everything is just like straight, it is like here, everything logical, measured.
Yeah.
But there it is like, I think, lower, we can say vibrationally, it is not made, everything of that is made from logic, from ego, from a primitive perspective, but not from that like intuition, imagination. And ancient philosophers, not only in Greece but also elsewhere, were telling us that the thing that distinguishes us from other animals, like from monkeys, or even I think it distinguishes us from the modern AI or robots, is
Yeah.
not the intelligence. Like we are named Homo sapiens, and sapiens is Homo thinking, like thinking man. But actually, it is not thinking, because I think monkeys or dogs can also, to some extent think. Like
Yeah.
AI maybe is not thinking, but it is logical. It has logic. It has like intelligence, this artificial intelligence. But what distinguishes us is this mind of God, is this imagination in which, as I mentioned, we can imagine perfect sphere, but we
Yeah.
cannot reproduce it in the real world. And AI also cannot do it. And
Yeah.
AI wouldn't even be able to imagine it, because it would be limited to everything from those algorithms and stuff like that. So it is the mind of God, this connection to this dream time, this connection to this world of ideas, as Plato mentioned, that distinguishes us from others. And we should use that to create like monuments, like things that are so beautiful that even hundreds of years from now, or from the ancient times, we are amazed at those ancient buildings, at those like things like Colosseum, like Parthenon, and even the pyramids of Giza, or even those sacred sites, some of which are very wonderful. And we are amazed because they were made from that higher mind, from this what we can call mind of God, not from like not from like intelligence that going from A to B, I will put a pillar here, I will do it here.
Yeah.
So this is what distinguishes us. And I think that we have fallen down because we are not using it. Our modern world is telling us that we should be, as you mentioned, intelligent, intellect, logical. We are, everything about our education from the earliest times is not about, there are some art classes, okay, but almost everything, 80-90% of it is how logical you are,
Yeah.
how much intellectual you do, and things like that. And because of that, we are falling and we are degrading to the level of AI, or like some primitive beings, monkeys, from that level of grandeur, of mind
Yeah.
of God, of imagination, of art, of beauty, of perfection. And that's why I think that society has also fallen on other levels. Like people are not striving to be better. Like, they are not taking care of themselves in many ways. They are not taking care of their environment. They are not,
Yeah.
taking care of others even. And I think that it is a huge degradation, and it is like the fall. Like, in the Bible, we have this fall from the Garden of Eden, the ideal state in which we were not ashamed of. at that time I think we were not that self-conscious, because ego is also like persona self-consciousness. Because if we were just like kids, if we had just that imagination, that beauty, kids are just joyful and they don't care about anything,
Absolutely.
and they
Yeah.
can create amazing things.
Oh,
Maybe a kid's drawing isn't perfect on the
I
canva
know.
on paper, but
Yeah.
in their minds it's this perfect, because they know that this thing is mind is all about perfection. So if we
Yeah.
were like that, it is the fall of humanity. Because in Garden of Eden, the spar, there is that Adam and Eve were not ashamed of themselves. So it is like this childhood, not self-conscious state, that we were not self-conscious about each other. We were not self-conscious about everything. We were not taking care. We were taking care, of course, but we were,
Mm.
not caring about all those, lower things, all those stuff. We were just, living in this blissful state. So I think that it is the fall, and I think that society is stronger and stronger into this fall, and is
Yeah.
also connected to Satanism, to Satan, because I'm talking about different topics, but
Sharing stuff.
to
Yeah.
quickly go into that, to conclude about this dream state and its superiority to just intellectual thinking, Satan, in like a big shortcut, in a big short story, cutting everything short,
Yeah.
Satan was like the best, the most intelligent of all the angels created by God.
Yes,
And
that's right.
he was so arrogant, he was so prideful, that he thought that if he is the best of all, to create a world that would be better than God's word. And I
Yeah.
think that it is a good connection with material, physical world, as I mentioned, which
Yeah,
isn't
that's right.
perfect.
That's right.
Many of people in conspiracy theories are telling that we live in the world of Satan, and that Satan is the ruler of this world. But it may be, on a deeper metaphorical level, it may be to some extent true. But it doesn't mean that we are in hell, or that it is all bad. But it means that this world isn't perfect. And just like, God was creating perfect things and was able to do those ideal things, Satan was so arrogant, so intellectual, that he decided to do things better. And we
Yeah.
sometimes in life are doing the same thing. We can
Yeah.
go on a path that it is, joyful, blissful, which is like a hero's journey, like this flow state, and everything is perfect. But we can, use our mind, ego, and intellect, and go, oh, I better will be a lawyer, or I will be a doctor, I will have the money, I will have the prestige, not like following this path that I feel like is flowing, like is ideal, like is joyful.
Yeah.
This is this prideful arrogance that is, concerned with everything around us nowadays. As I mentioned, these concrete jungles. It is like, let's make things cheaper, and let's make people like chickens in those in those cages.
Endless chocolate.
So it is
Yeah,
the
I
same,
know.
like maybe not archetype, because archetypes like this general things, but it is
Yeah,
a
yeah,
thing, like a vibration, like an energy that persists it is in every one of us. We
yeah.
say that
Hmm.
we have like angel, and we have like this demon or Satan, I don't know how it is called, that we have two sides of us, and because we have this intellect, and we have this like flowy, like blissful state, and it is everywhere. It is literally everywhere, because even if we think of right and left hemisphere of our brains, there were studies which disconnected these hemispheres in patients. I don't know how they did that. It would be awful to do that. Like, imagine living in one hemisphere, like in the
Oh,
right or only in the left. But there
mhm.
were studies about that, and in the
Yeah,
right hemisphere, which is about creative stuff, it is about the feminine. Being only in the right thing made people not knowing the not knowing about that they are not everything. They thought that everything is
yeah,
oneness. They couldn't separate themselves from other things or other beings. And it's the left hemisphere, this logical, intellectual, masculine stuff, that it is, dividing everything, like science.
yeah,
There is a meme that, give a scientist like a leaf, and he will dissect everything, or that like a Christmas tree is given to a scientist, and he, gets all of the things, and he
Yeah.
deconstructs everything, instead of admiring the beauty of a tree, or it is like, dissecting everything. And science is all about that, all that. And I think that it is, also about this satanic, in a metaphorical way, agenda,
Yeah.
because we are starting to live more and more in material world, and we are disconnected from that spiritual, from that inner sphere. We are disconnected from that sacredness that is connected to those sacred sites that we're talk
Yeah.
about in a moment. But we're disconnected from that, and society is pushing us to disconnect. Even this, grinding, hustling, things like that are disconnected, that we disconnecting us, that we just need to do the logical thing, that we just need to, we are being in this illusion. In India, it is called Maya, that our world is an illusion. And only through going inwards, through discovering the consciousness, the Brahman, the Atman, the consciousness that is in us, but it is also connected with the entire universe, only by connecting with that we can, dissolve the illusion, dissolve the Maya. And it's the same thing I mentioned in the Platonic world of ideas, that there is this perfect world of consciousness, of imagination, and we are in this illusion of material, satanic world of matter. Matter is also sometimes symbolized by Satan, and we know, we've got everything now about matter, about atheism, atheism, matter scientific method. I like science, but I don't agree with one of its prime axioms. Axioms are like assumptions that we start with. We cannot think if we don't accept that thinking exists. In order to
Yeah.
think, we
Yeah.
need to accept that there is something like thinking. So this is an axiom in
Yeah.
a metaphorical way. And one
Yeah.
of that assumptions of science is that everything in our world is only matter and its interactions. So only atoms, particles, and interactions like fields, like forces, electromagnetism, gravity. But I don't agree with that axiom at all. I don't think that everything is only matter. And I think that, going into science more and more, pushing atheism, disconnecting us from all of that, is like satanic thing. And it may be that we are at a turning point, that either we will go into this satanic new world order stuff, or we will go into we'll come back to nature, to spiritual things, this world of ideas, this dream time. It is not about only being in dream time. It is about, like I said with artisan, he's taking his imagination into the world, creating beautiful things. So we can take this dream time, we can take this godly world of God, mind of God. We can take this thing into this place that is maybe really a physical universe of Satan himself, who knows? And we can bring all those things, we can bring kindness and all of those higher spiritual things, in order to make this world a beautiful place. Maybe not ideal, but it can be beautiful. It is like there is a metaphor, there is a story that the best way to exist in hell, to survive being in hell, imagine being sent down to hell, is just being kind. If you are kind in hell, you will survive, you will do everything. And the same thing is in this world, but we are disconnected. As you mentioned, those sacred sites, we are also being disconnected. Science are telling us, no, these sites are, just primitive beliefs of our ancestors, nothing much, and they were not sacred, they are just simple rocks, there aren't ley lines, there aren't, sacred energies, it is all illusion, all of our dreams, all of our mystical spiritual experiences are all hallucinatory. It is in order to disconnect from our soul, just to be physical automata, just being those flesh machines, flesh robots, like animals. And they want us to be like that, in that state, because then they can control us in a very easy way. Because imagine, we can easily control a dog, because a dog is living in his automat. A dog is living in a condition in which he only, pleasure, pain. Of course, dogs also have some emotions, they are cute and stuff like that, but a primitive state of a dog when he's in a survival mode, or he's angry, it's only pleasure, pain. He goes into pleasure like some food, or he goes into pain like, something bad. And they want people, they want to numb people with all of those, I don't know, drugs, alcohol, all of that, chemical compounds in food and water. They want us to be like that, only pleasure, pain. They want us to be addicted to Netflix, social media, porn, and stuff like that in order to be easily controllable. Then they can, do one thing, give us pleasure, and we will go to pleasure because we won't have any like free will. And this, I think that it is very, very clearly seen in our society when we have people with no like will to live. Like we have people that are really numb. We have more and more people that are numb because of all the social media, of all the dopamine, of all those foods. And this is, a big concern to us. And as I mentioned, it is connected with like disconnecting us with all of those sacred sites. So now
Yeah.
we'll go to finally to those sacred sites.
Okay. Wow, that was intense. That was really good. Yeah. No,
Yeah,
well,
but it wasn't the all for sure.
no.
No,
I
no.
understand. I understand. My mentor always says it does come down to consciousness, which is essentially what you're saying. So it is,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So I understand what you're saying. But with the sacred sites, I mean, they're obviously all interconnected, and this is the main thing that I really get pissed off about is that, I mean, mainstream academia don't like to link everything together. They're just like, oh, this is here, this is here.
Exactly.
Like, that's
Yes,
what
they are
really,
dissecting everything. They are, separating everything. As I
yeah,
mentioned, we have like a beautiful tree. We can, have holistically it and be amazed by how wonderful a tree is. But, science will, cut everything down and
yeah,
analyze every detail, and everything is separate. And there is no like wonder and things like that, which are all about consciousness.
yeah, exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Yes,
And
but you continue. Yes.
okay, I was just gonna say, like, yeah, and the ley lines in Australia, they call them song lines. So sound is really
Mm.
important, and I think that, have you heard the theory that sound came first in the universe before light, before
Oh, there's a lot to it. In India, in Hindu thought, we've got the famous Om, which is the primeval sound. There is mentioned that this sound started everything, but
yeah,
a similar thing is actually in Egypt, for instance, because you know we will also by talking about that, we'll also continue with this consciousness and this dream world and this world of ideas because it is all connected. We
yeah,
mentioned that everything came probably from the mind of God, from the dream of God, universe, higher power, whatever you want to call it. This higher thing may be the entire existence, the infinity, something. It is all in this ideal mind and this all like imagination. And it is connected, for instance, with Egypt, especially with Egypt and India, but also, as you mentioned, the sound in Aboriginal Australian tradition, because in Egypt there is mention that everything came from a god that is everything. This god, there are several versions of this myth because Egypt was divided for many years and stuff like that. But in one version it is Atum, and in another is another name. But Atum, interestingly, is for the ancient Egyptians everything. He's the primeval god. We say that all Egyptians were primitive. They were thinking that there were plenty of gods and that stuff. But they were in some extent monotheistic because they think that everything came from like a single being, which is almost similar to infinity. And they couldn't describe Atum. We have depictions of Osiris, Horus, and other gods, but Atum was also indescribable. You aren't able in ancient Egyptian thought, I don't know, carve an image of Atum or even describe him.
yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah, yeah.
indescribable. And
Mhm.
in this story, Atum is in infinite waters called Noon. And waters are waves and darkness. And it's a state before the creation of anything. There is this, like, let's say God, let's say the consciousness, whatever we can call it, but this absolute, and he is in infinite potential. And he sees that these waters are chaotic. In
Yeah,
these waters are infinite. So in infinity, in these waters, there is everything. You know what I mean? In infinity, there is everything. So
Yeah.
in this water, there is even our conversation and an
Yeah. Yeah.
infinite amount of other versions of our conversation, and all the times and all the stuff you can imagine and all stuff you can think of. This is the chaos. The same in
Yeah.
the Greek. I think that every one of us know about the Greek concept of chaos, that at the beginning there was chaos. Also in the Bible, we've got that at first God, divided the heavens and earth because everything was, like in this infinite potential, it was chaos because when we've got everything at once, imagine
Yeah.
that everything ever whatever could be imagined is at once, there is chaos. You don't know what to do, there is no boundaries, as we mentioned. So the
Yeah.
first thing that Atom in Egypt is doing is dividing, just as God in the Bible divided heavens and earth. So it is the primeval division into heavens and earth. We can say that it is a division into masculine and feminine. If we assume
Mhm.
that this is the primeval division, and we see that
Yeah.
everything has, like, in the concept of polarity, everything has a masculine and feminine principle. So I think that we can assume that the first division was actually into masculine and feminine. And in India, we've got Brahman, the consciousness. There is mentioned that Brahman is actually consciousness. He's lying in infinity, and what he does, he looks into infinity, he starts to be self-conscious, and he's divided. Like this, he's
Yeah.
everything, but he divides itself into two. Like, an embryo,
Yeah.
you was having a child at the beginning, and
Yeah.
embryo, when it comes to how human beings and everything, I think, like, living things are created in biology, we have like one cell, then there is
Yeah.
the division into two, four, it's multiplying. But it
Yes.
is all from one thing. And it's the same with Atom. Atom is in infinity, it is oneness, but then he decided to divide itself and create other gods. And those gods actually are more descriptions of those first gods. These are not Osiris, Horus, these are other gods, like God of Wind, or those infinite waters,
Mhm.
or other things. These are like more forces of nature, we would say, like primeval things, like, as I mentioned, the first division into masculine and feminine. And then, there are several versions of this story. It is said that, the oneness, it is a bit primitive thinking, that because, our ancient ancestors wanted to describe things in terms they knew about, but they
Mm.
did that exceptionally well, because there is mention that, this atom, this everything, masturbated and created other self, and there were two of them, masculine and feminine, and then they started procreating and dividing into multiple other, like, sections of gods. It is going like a pyramid, 1, 2, 4,
Yeah.
6. It is
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
description of dividing this potential, because, as I mentioned, if you imagine everything happening at once, everything right now, it could be
Yes.
chaos. So in order for a word like this to exist, or in order for a story to exist, like a hero's journey, you need to separate something. Because another
Mhm.
way, everything is at once, there is nothing. There is this concept that everything is nothing. Infinity is zero. Even in
Yeah.
mathematics,
Yeah.
infinity is zero. So if there is no distinction between things, everything happens at once, there is nothing. And
Exactly.
that's why there was this first division into two. Because
Okay.
now we've got separation, we can see two things. How could you describe light if you haven't experienced darkness?
That's yeah.
If everything was light, you wouldn't know it's light because it was everything. So we need separation in order to experience things. That's why in modern esoterics and spirituality, we are saying that we are here we are like God, like consciousness divided into different bodies to experience itself, or
Yeah.
universe experiencing itself. It is to some extent distorted, but to some extent true. Because, as I mentioned, there needed to be a distinction, but now this God, let's say, is in two
Mhm.
parts. Let's say
Yeah.
masculine and feminine. And what he does, he's procreated in some way, and he created others. So now there's four of them. Like, there is mother, father, and children, but he's all of them. No, and we
Mhm.
can have more and more experience. We are firstly experiencing oneness, so there was nothing. Then we were experiencing masculine and feminine, so there was some interaction, but it was limited. It
Yeah.
was boring, maybe. We can say that, it was boring. And
Yeah.
then we have children, so there are more interactions, there are more problems and more stuff with children, and it
Yeah.
goes infinitely until a world like this with plenty of different elements and separations is being created. And it is the
Yeah.
same with Egypt, as I mentioned. It is the same with India. And it's mentioned that everything came because the sound is a mention of how, like, this God, this universe awakened from that dream, we may say. That, everything was happening at once. Imagine everything. So there was nothing, chaos. And this sound was the first creation, because the sound was able to, like, make this first division between each other. It was about
Yeah.
frequency. If everything was once, and now we introduce the concept of frequency into the world, that we have like a spectrum of frequencies, like we have high frequencies, low frequencies. Now we've got polarity, and you
Yeah.
have like spectrum, in the middle. We have
Yeah.
masculine, feminine, and everything in the middle. So that's why it is sound, and that's why in the Aboriginal thinking it is sound. It may be connected to this Om of India, and from that Om, so everything started from oneness into frequency, into first polarity, and then it went indefinitely. And it's the same as I mentioned in the Bible, that the first there was, the division between heavens and earth, because, if everything was like cosmos and we don't know everything, we needed like some material things. Maybe it is that metaphor, but we needed that division, that initial division. So that's why it is connected to that. And when it comes, we are finishing this, topic of metaphysics and world of ideas, God consciousness, but let's finish with the sacred site. You mentioned
Yeah.
the ley lines. Ley lines were not only in Australia, and it isn't the modern thing, because in medieval ages there were also mentions about, lines that are energetic and that are geodesic in some point, that they are on Earth. Even in ancient times there were mentions of that. In ancient China they were called Lung Mei, so the dragon paths. The dragon paths, like those paths of energies. And even, modern feng shuis from ancient times, during which people believed that they cannot, like, build a concrete jungle wherever they want, but they needed to place
Yeah. Yeah.
buildings in order not to, if there was a building on a high energetic line, it could
Yeah.
collapse. There could be an earthquake or something like that. So they were placing their cities in a special ways according to ley lines. We see it in Rome, even in Washington, which is a modern version, because Washington DC was made mostly by Freemasons. Washington, George Washington himself was a Freemason, and entire plan of Washington was according to astrology and this geodesic properties of those energetic lines. So, we have Washington, we have Rome, we have Egypt, Alexandria, Heliopolis. Ancient people knew that they cannot, like we today, build, I want to place, I will place a concrete jungle here and people will live there. No, because they knew that maybe the building will not collapse, but maybe people will be ill because of that, because of different energies. As I mentioned, people were more intuitive, more in sync with nature, with this world of ideas, non-physical world. So they felt things, and nowadays we are no, feelings are illusionary, hallucinatory, so we are only into logical mind, and we can build whenever we can, wherever we can,
Yeah.
and
Right. Yeah.
unfortunately, because of that, we are, falling down as humanity. But
Yeah.
also, these ley lines, we say that because there was an ancient like verse set that, it is famous hermetic principle, as above so below. So
Yeah.
as in heavens so in earth. And even in the Bible there is a mention, I am paraphrasing now, but in Polish it is the same, like as in heavens so on earth. Like there is this mirror, like there is this, the bigger version, the universe, the stars are reflected on Earth in the ley lines or in buildings. That's why the pyramids are aligned to Orion constellation. That's why, other buildings, as I mentioned, Washington is aligned astrologically, because people for thousands of years believed that as in heaven, so on earth, as above, so below, as within, so without. It is the law of correspondence that states, and it's scientifically proven that this law is correct because we see fractal patterns. And this
Yeah.
law states that the bigger picture corresponds to the smaller picture, and the smaller picture corresponds even to the smaller picture. It is the same as I mentioned that in our minds we can zoom infinitely and we can
Yeah.
find the ideal sphere or ideal circle. But in this world, we to some extent cannot do that. But we have fractal patterns, which are mathematical abstractions. Like these are fractal patterns that you can zoom infinitely. For hours, for days, you are zooming into, and you see the same like pattern that is repeating. But what
Yeah.
is interesting, it is repeating in a different form. It is never the same. And that's amazing. Fractal patterns are actually showing us that infinity exists because you can zoom like, there are this like, it's like a
I have seen
seashells or
them.
like pine cone,
Oh yeah.
this,
Yeah. Yeah.
this fractals, and you zoom, you see that
Yeah.
they're almost the same, they're similar. You see that this is the same pattern, but they are different.
Yeah. That's right.
They are different infinitely. This is the best proof
Yeah.
that our universe is to some extent, in mathematical terms, infinite. And
Yeah.
we see those fractal patterns on Earth. We see that our veins are like fractal patterns, and we see just as our veins go like this, like those dendrites, the same
Yeah.
is on leaves, on
Yeah.
plants. We see the same thing, and it's as above, so below. So as in higher picture, so in lower picture. So as we zoom indefinitely, it is as above, so below in those, as above, so
Yeah.
below in those fractals. But there is a place for individuality because it is never the same. And our ancient ancestors knew that well, and just as we have chakra systems and energetic lines, according to acupuncture or Hindu thought, that we have energetic lines and energetic centers in our bodies, so
Yeah.
as below, so above. So our earth also has those energetic lines, those veins, and
Yeah.
has also some special points, special like energy chakras. And it is believed that some chakras are like Mount Kailash in India or like the Great Pyramid of Giza. I don't know where exactly they are. It is hard to find, but I think that as above, so below. Just as we have those chakras, so
Yeah.
the earth has. And
Yeah.
it is all about these ley lines, because these are just, we have veins in our bodies, so earth has its ley lines. And that's an amazing concept actually, because astrologers, esotericists in the Middle Ages, alchemists were telling us that the cosmos, as we mentioned at the beginning, that there was infinite chaos, everything. It zooms everywhere. We have infinity, then we have our universe, let's say, and then we
Yeah.
have our solar system, and then we have Earth, and then we have humans, and then we have atoms, right? And
Yeah.
atoms are to some extent similar to the build of our solar system. There are protons. Maybe there aren't, in that primitive model, like orbiting like orbits of the planets, but they are behaving in a similar way,
Uh-huh.
So it is as above, so below. It is infinite zoom, and everything is similar to each other, but never the same. So that's why we in nature we don't see the same exact things. There is always something different, and that's beautiful. And that's
Yeah.
how our material reality works. And with our intellect, we would like to categorize things, that
Yeah.
these are white birds, these are black birds, and they are the same. We
Yeah.
do that in an intellectual way. We want to go like, this is city, this is not city, in those terms. But it is never like that, and it never will be. This is a fallacy of logical thinking, because it cannot be like that. Even as I mentioned, in fractals, we never see the same thing. So when it comes to those sacred sites, there was a law that these sites are on those like crossroads of the veins of our planet, or like these are even the chakrams of the earth. And we have special like esoteric methods of measuring them. There are some ways, like with some special pipes. Some people use like special, there are some esoteric ways to
Yeah.
find those lines in those
Yeah.
terms.
I have seen that. Yeah.
And now it is a big question. it is a big question because we know that the Great Pyramid of Giza isn't random, that megaliths and many other pyramids are, harmonically placed on our planet, not in random things, they are
Yeah.
connected with those ley lines. But now, I don't know, I have a question, and I think that it is in 50-50% correct and not. Did our ancient ancestors used those metaphysical, non-physical energies, and that's how they knew that, oh, here I need to place a pyramid, or here I need to place a temple or a sacred site in Australia? Or did they, as you mentioned before our interview, did they use this knowledge about the dodecahedron of our planet? Did they knew that our
Yeah.
planet is shaped in a certain way, and they did that in a physical, like intellectual manner, that, oh, I know that our planet is, like that, so I will
Yeah.
build site here, I will calculate those things. And I think that it is both, that our ancient or even prehistoric ancestors knew both about those non-physical energies and they felt them, and they also used like mathematical, geographical, geologic stuff, like intellectual things, and they like mapped the entire planet. And you mentioned before the interview about the dodecahedron grid, and in my book, here it is, everyone can see, I found right before our interview a quote that will be very interesting, because again, we've got Plato, who mentioned all of that I mentioned about words of ideas and God, but in one of his dialogues, which is Phaedo, I've got a quote. Plato says that the real Earth, viewed from above, resembles a ball made of 12 pieces of leather, variegated and marked out in different colors. So his description on Earth, we imagine that at that time people were so primitive that they thought that the Earth is flat, that it is limited, but now Plato is telling us that it looks like from above like a ball, and that it has like 12 sides to it. So it is a dodecahedron, also a Platonic solid, also invented by Plato to some extent, but it is a dodecahedron. And many people, including Russian scientists, I can also, because in the I will say in the 9th chapter of this book, I described not only these ancient mentions, but also ley lines, pyramids, and prehistoric measures of the Earth. But there were a few Russian scientists. I will say, in 1973, three Russian scientists, Nikolai Goncharov, Vyacheslav Morozov, and Valery Makarov, they published an article called "Is the Earth a Large Crystal?" And they concluded by analyzing 3,300 sacred sites, temples from ancient times and medieval times, that all of them are connected by a grid made from dodecahedron, just like Plato said that our planet is a dodecahedron, but also they mentioned that it is, they are all connected in this dodecahedron plus icosahedron grid, which is, more advanced, but they mentioned that these sites connect, and it may be that our planet, because we do not know exactly what lies in the center of our planet, in the core, we have theories. But they mentioned that our planet can be a huge crystal, and crystal are shaped, are not like balls, like our core in modern scientific theory, but these crystals are, for instance, dodecahedrons. So they mentioned that our Earth's interior may be a huge crystal that is in dodecahedron, and that because of that crystal, there may be electromagnetic anomalies, because on one side of the Earth there is apex of the crystal, and on the other there is, the side of the crystal. So on the apex is closer to the surface than, than the side of the crystal, if we were to put a ball on a crystal. So they mentioned that it may be why there happen things like in Bermuda Triangle, why people feel the ley lines, maybe just like birds feel electromagnetic field of our planet, and that's how they manage to travel on the entire planet. Maybe that's how humans knew about ley lines. So it may be the case, and it may be because I also have some other examples. I will use my book if we are here, because we have evidence from our solar system that other planets and celestial bodies, like some moons of some planets, may be also made of some Platonic solids, of some other shapes. They may not be entirely spheres, not balls, because for instance, we've got Jupiter, and Jupiter we know is a gaseous planet, and we don't know where Jupiter starts. If you were to fly into Jupiter, you would fly through like some clouds of gases and stuff like that. But you don't know if there even is like some land in Jupiter. But
Oh
it
yeah.
may be because we see some of these gases, just how they are behaving. There are some winds on Jupiter, and we see
Yeah.
that, and because of those winds we can assume that the interior of Jupiter, beneath those gases, those clouds, may be also some platonic solid, some crystal. And I will have wait a moment. I've got an example that one of the moons of Uranus, called Miranda, may have some enormous triangles in them, and it may be that Miranda is in shape of an icosahedron, so also another platonic solid. And
Okay.
now, as I mentioned, Jupiter may be a giant tetrahedron because of its great red spot. It is like a wind on Jupiter's surface. So because of that, some researchers found out that it may be actually a huge crystal. So it may be because of that we feel and we have those ley lines. But also we've got some anomalous maps of our planet, like the Peru map, the Philip Boitier map. We have plenty of maps that are showing our planet on its entirety. We have maps of Antarctica before it was even found in the modern world, which probably the sources of those maps come from ancient times, which may point that our ancient ancestors traveled the entire Earth and mapped
Yeah.
it. So it may be that to some extent it may be like intuitive, those ley lines, feeling of those ley lines, but maybe our ancient ancestors also traveled, took measures of the earth and stuff like that. And in my book I describe the Great Pyramid, in which there are encoded measures of the earth. But I won't go into it right now, but it is a lot, it is a huge topic, and I think I will continue. I think that even maybe in a future book, or maybe even in a separate dedicated book, I will cover specifically the prehistoric measures of the earth, because there is much more to it. And I have really plenty of evidence that not only Egyptians, but also in other areas of our planet, the earth was mapped and the measures of the earth were very well known. So there was something of intellectual thing in the measures of the earth, but also, of course, there was this spiritual, maybe electromagnetic thing with the ley lines. And that's why, maybe aborigines or some other people from other places of the world didn't map the entire planet. Maybe they didn't travel everywhere, but maybe they felt that here there is something, I feel it, we should have a sacred side. Also, it may be that, as we mentioned, this, according to science, is only a hallucination, but maybe they saw something. Just as modern people, I can see sometimes auras or some energies. Things like that happen to me, and I don't think that these are mere hallucinations. So maybe people build those sacred sites because they saw the energies. Maybe we were more intuitive. As I mentioned, from the last 500 years, we are being, disconnected, and we are being cut off of that intuition, consciousness, spirituality into the material realm. But maybe our ancient ancestors were much more into the spirituality, intuition. And some psychologists even mentioned, by analyzing plenty of ancient texts, that our ancient ancestors were not feeling the separation that much as we do. They were going, for instance, in ancient Greece, they were going to the forest and they were feeling the things, the vibrations from the forest. They were becoming one with the forest. That's
Yeah.
why they built magnificent temples, because they knew the beauty, and they knew that by just being at the temple, in the temple, they were, tuning themselves into that beauty, into that spiritual thing. And you mentioned this sound in Australia, but we mentioned this frequency, that it may be the first divisor of everything in our universe. But actually, this sound may be also about tuning into. We can tune into nature. We sometimes feel out of tune. We sometimes feel, if we are in nature a lot, we feel being tuned into nature, into
Mm.
surroundings. We sometimes feel really depressed just by being in a depressive place, if we
Yeah.
are in dark, like, or in a concrete jungle that we mentioned at the beginning.
Mhm.
Everything has its frequency. Those energies also have its frequency. Pyramids have its frequency. There were several researches done on temples, on megalithic sites, and those stones were tuned to specific frequency. Maybe in order to be healed, maybe in order to achieve higher states of consciousness, like in the pyramid. Pyramid has its own frequency. We know that Napoleon went for an entire night to the pyramid, and after coming back the
Yeah.
next morning, he said that he experienced things that are unimaginable. The
Mhm.
same with the sacred sites, with the rituals at those
Mhm.
sites, with some ceremonies. It is all about altered states of consciousness. And those
Yeah.
altered states of consciousness are connecting us to this word of ideas, word of God, and to those higher levels, higher frequencies. And this is important. And those sacred sites, that's the reason why those sacred sites are important to be preserved. The
Yeah.
tradition of those rituals and ceremonies is very important to be preserved, because it can help us navigate in the modern world full of chaos, full of noise, full of things that are artificial, full of
That's
things that are stupid. And those things, those
yeah.
rituals, those ceremonies, those sacred sites that needs to be preserved are needed for us to actually reconnect with the source, reconnect with nature, and reconnect with divinity that we have this divinity inside us, but we need to awaken it.
Yeah, absolutely. Ah.
I will drink a bit.
I feel like I'm in a dreamy state already just listening to you.
It is also
Oh,
tuning into a frequency, like
it is.
channeling almost.
Yes, yes. Well, science still hasn't proven where thoughts come from, you know? So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there is a lot. There is a lot that science can't prove. So I
Mm-hmm.
understand. And
Yes.
yeah, in Australia, yeah, there are a lot of sacred sites. Oh, yes, there is a major song line here from Bali that goes down to Bairnsdale, and the sacred sites are all naturally formed. So they're like
Mm.
Uluru
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, big sacred sites. And like naturally as in not built, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So those sacred
That
sites,
proves the point of the ley lines, and that they're natural.
yes.
Maybe they are connected, as we mentioned, with the hypothesis of a crystal earth. Maybe they are connected
Yes, yes,
with this
yes.
crystal. Or
Mm.
maybe it is like more spiritual, but we see even nature goes with that. Nature takes the path of least resistance. And as I mentioned, we are disconnected, but if we connect to the source, we can make our life effortless. In many
Mm.
spiritual traditions, it is about effortlessness, blissfulness. But that's why I was not that happy about that intelligence thing, because
Yeah,
we
I
can
know.
make our life effortless, just like those natural formations were effortlessly shaped into those ley lines because it was natural, because that was where energy flowed. We can do the same, but we can took the Satan ego intellect, and we can not use logical thing. I will do that thing, I want that thing, you know what I mean. And
Yeah.
then we create resistance. And if we reconnected with the source and with those ancient traditions, our lives, our societies would be much more effortless. And it is the problem with every ideology, that every ideology, as the word is meaning, ideology is always based on an idea. But this idea is an intellectual thing.
Mhm.
Rightists are with their stuff, leftists are with their stuff, and no one in politics, for instance, is with what is right, what is the less effortless path.
Yes.
Everyone sticks to its philosophy, to its political dogma, and they don't know that, why we are creating all of this circus. We need a person who will be able, that is the higher state, that is what is, not being right, but being right, doing the right thing, whatever our ideology is. Maybe we are leftist, but what is right now is what is on the right. Maybe we are rightists, but what is needed now, what is right now, is on the left, you know. And that's the hero's journey. We were mentioning those heroes in those ancient stories, you
Yeah.
know. The problem with the hero is always that he is limited to some extent. And you know, because he's incapable of doing something, maybe he's incapable of, you know, saving an empire from a dragon, you know, a
Yeah.
standard, you know, a typical story. But then he goes into the unknown, you know, he goes on a journey in order to explore. And this is a great metaphor of being closed in a cage of intellect and of our intelligence and of our thinking ideology. We can be in that cage and only do what, you know, fits with our ideology, or we can go outside that bubble that we created ourselves and we can go explore, and then we may find another solution. This the same thing is like we may have a problem in our lives and we think, oh, we cannot solve this problem, and we are constantly in this repetition, this cycle, almost like a
Yeah.
karmic cycle, we can
Yeah.
say. And then we go outside, we forget about it, and the solution comes effortlessly. And it's
Yeah.
the same with modern world. The problem with modern world and with ideologies is that it wants everything logical. And that's why, you know, before current era, before not current era, before modern times, you know, there was religious thinking, there was mythological thinking, which was about exploring. There was the hero, he was a set of beliefs, but then he went exploring and he found out the world is different. There are other things, and he came back to the kingdom. He maybe, you know, met a wizard. Maybe this wizard gave him special power, and he was able, because he experienced more. He had more experience and more new things. He was able to come back to that bubble and destroy the problem, destroy the dragon, and then everyone lived happily ever after. This is the story, and the story is about exploration. And in modern world, we are too much in ideologies. We are too much in that like ideal like kingdom that is being devastated, and we cannot do everything because we don't want to go out, you know, reach other regions, you know, reach other intellectual stuff. And you know, as I mentioned before, the modern world, the word was mythological. We mentioned that science thinks that myths and legends are just primitive, you know, descriptions of physical things, but it was not like that. It was about the story, it was about the process that
Yeah.
everyone undergo, and people before that were undergoing that process. And that's why, because nowadays we're intellectual, we do not have the process, we are only in the left brain thinking, let's say. We are not into the unknown, into the effortlessness, energy, spiritual, and that's why we have problems. And that's why any ideology and any modern system of thinking collapsed. You know, communism or even fascism or even, you
Yeah.
know, Nazism, all of those things were purely logical. There
Mhm.
was only logic, you know. In communism, there was belief like in science. Science was like the biggest thing. You know, communists were not believing in psychic phenomena. They were closing all the churches. They thought that, you know, these are just, you know, primitive beliefs of people's. And that's why it collapsed, because it was limited. It was only intellectual. And
Mhm.
modern world is striving in some sense towards this communist idea of only material world, only intellectual world. We are striving towards intellectualization of everything. And you know what's the biggest problem? Because if we were only intellectuals, then AI will overpower us in a few years, because AI is about intellect, and AI will have better intellect than us. It is more intelligent, it is faster, it has better memory. But what AI do not have, AIs do not have this higher thinking, this world of ideas, this imagination. And
Yes.
that's what distinguishes us as humans. And every ideology tries to limit human only to that what is logical in terms of this ideology. Even science is, as we mentioned, that science says that only matter exists in its interaction. It is
Mm.
also, in some extent, an ideology, because if we were to fully explore the world, we would not assume that there is only matter. You know, I am born here, I am exploring the world, I want to know what the world is, what the truth is, but why should I assume that only matter and its interaction exists? So science is limited and it's also ideological based. So that's the problem.
Yes. absolutely. And you mentioned memory, and obviously crystals hold memory. And so, do you think that, a lot of people are remembering all these things? Like, what's your take on memory? How, like in terms of frequency as well?
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a feeling, yeah, they're
Mm-hmm.
interrelated.
Yes, I distinguish physical and like some non-physical type of memory. The physical type
Mm,
of memory is when I want to memorize something for an exam and I'm memorizing and repeating and then I forget. And another kind of memory, like that is universal, is what I'm doing here. Maybe I at some point memorized some of those points. Maybe I taken a look at my book for quotes. But as I'm talking here with you, I'm not using like a physical memory like on a test. I'm not like, dictating everything that I memorized to you. It would be boring, and I'm
yeah,
more in a flow state, as we mentioned, in this exploratory, non-intellectual state to some extent, really. And this more memory, and sometimes, I was describing to you this universe, connecting those dots, but it's all creative in my case. I actually sometimes I came to so powerful conclusions on interviews like that, then then I'm shocked. I'm writing the things down because I never heard of them. I never thought of that idea. Even today, I think I came to a few new things when it comes to connecting, really, to connecting this Plato world, Hindu world, the Dreamtime. I really, actually, today came up with new ideas. And
yeah,
that's how we should live. And
yes,
we if I was here and you asked me, tell me about ancient sites, and I will be like, I like a Wikipedia. No, there are ancient sites in these regions. There are there are on area, like, you know what I mean.
I
And
know.
that is the problem for society, and we are striving
Yeah,
to that. I never liked school because I
same.
wanted to do what I'm doing right now, to came
Yeah.
up with new ideas, to go further explore it. And school was only no. You had to give a presentation, as I mentioned, that there are sacred sites that many in those areas, literally. And that is
Oh
destroying
no.
our world and our kids. That's why children are started to being depressed at earlier and earlier ages, because they are, they are being in a prison to some extent. They cannot fully explore, they cannot fully like imagine and explore everything, and that's really
Yeah.
sad. So there are, you right now see that there are two types of memories. And we mentioned last thing about memory, that there was a frequency at the beginning, and we mentioned that there are
Yeah.
higher and lower frequencies, but we also mentioned this chaos that state that everything exists at once. And in spirituality, there are gurus that are telling us that time is an illusion, everything exists at once. But it is connected that in this higher state, everything is really now. So imagine that this God, this primeval thing, in everything, in infinite potential, he knows everything at once. It is omnipresence, because everything is experienced at once, and
Yeah.
omniscience, because we see everything, as I mentioned, that in
Mm,
infinity, all the times, all the speculations, all the situations happening, all the possible universes, like the multiverse, happening at once. So
yeah.
this is this higher memory. And you mentioned that it is connected to frequency. Yes, it is, because by tuning into a frequency, you're tuning into a particular outcome. You're creating from that chaotic potential actually a potentiality, a real situation. Like
Yeah.
God is creating from that infinite potential. He said, oh, I want a universe like that. Let's focus on that frequency. And now we have this universe.
Yeah, right. That's amazing. So have you heard, okay, this is a bit sidetracked. It's still on the sacred sites, but have you heard about the glyphs here in Carrion? They're linked to the ancient
Uh-huh.
Egyptian.
Yes,
Yeah.
since I've been researching them a lot, and I
Oh,
don't mention them a lot because there is a huge controversy about them,
mm,
because there is a suspicion that some man, I don't know if he was a professor or he was just like into ancient Egypt, that he may hoax them, forged
yeah.
them actually. So it may be like that. That's why do not say that no, they are authentic, no, they are forged. I don't know. I simply don't know if they are true or not. So I think that we shouldn't base our ideas on things that are not well known.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fair. I know, but they are, I mean, regardless if they're true or
Mm-hmm.
not, they are under threat at the moment, and it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
sad. Yeah, they want to build, those ugly buildings that you were mentioning
Mm-hmm.
nearby, and they want to, yeah, they have kind of destroyed a bit of the
Mm-hmm.
glyphs at the moment. Yeah, so it's really sad, but there are a lot of sacred sites here in Australia that link together. Anyways, it is on the 33-degree ley line, which is really
Mm-hmm.
important at 33. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I don't remember all the ley lines, so.
yeah, I know. I don't remember either, but that one's important. I do remember that. I only mention
Mm-hmm.
it because my mentor was very connected to that site, and there's a lot of stories there. You know what I mean? Like you were saying, the tribal people hold the knowledge. It's not like just one story. A lot of people have knowledge of what's
Mm-hmm.
going on there because the ancients they scribed differently, like you said, and it's not they just there's a lot of information in just one picture,
Mm-hmm.
and so
Mm-hmm.
we all have the piece of the tapestry. That's what she used to say. We're all interwoven,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be
Yes,
respected.
yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This is what we've been talking about in this conversation, that there is separation, but there's also oneness. Without
Mm,
separation, there would be everything chaos, infinite potentiality. That's why we need separation, but we cannot separate everything like in science, because then, it would be awful to live in such a world.
yes. Yeah. We ultimately come from the nothingness, like you said, and yeah,
Or everything.
or everything. Yeah. It is like that. Um, so whereabouts are you? You're in Poland, you said? You're Polish,
Yes,
right?
I'm in Poland, yes.
Okay, okay. Are there many sacred sites there? I don't know much about Poland.
Yes, there are some, but even one of those sites is like guarded. That it is for tourists. You can visit it. I don't know how it. I think it's Ślęża or something like that. You can
Mm,
visit it. There are plenty of tourists, but some people I know tried to like do some investigations, or went off the path, because there is path,
yeah,
because it is like a mountainous or hill or something like that. They wanted to go like to the right or something, and they were people, like those guards were after
oh,
them, so it
okay.
was scary in a few cases. But there are, and there are mostly also, as in Australia, I think, things out of rocks. And I think that everywhere on
Mm,
Earth, most of those ley lines and those maybe chakras of our
yeah,
planet are made out of stones, but
yeah,
not, as you mentioned, some random stones. No, sometimes natural stones, but sometimes not random stones. But people actually used stones in, like, Stonehenge or Göbekli Tepe or the Great Pyramid, and even in Peru, in Cusco, we've got
yeah,
on one of those ley lines there is a chapel, a chart of conquistadors. But this chapel is actually located on previous megalithic blocks. And
uh-huh,
many in Europe, I am a little bit into the history of Europe, many churches, like 70-80% of medieval churches, medieval I said, because later people forgot about ley lines and thought that they are just imagination. But
yeah,
most medieval churches in Europe are located on previous sacred sites, like some megaliths, some
okay,
menhirs, dolmens, and stuff like that. And it's interesting because it is like overtaking those sites and using. I am not totally against Christianity, but I think that Catholic Church as an institution is doing some bad things. And
mm,
maybe, those churches were put there in order to control the local population,
yeah,
let's say that there were a few tribes that had the sacred site, and now they are conquering them and building on their sacred site a church that has symbols of those invaders. It is like a domination to some extent. But also
yes,
some people think that modern buildings, like those conspiratory stuff, like, in London, the city stuff, these banking things,
Hmm.
are built specifically by some Freemasons or secret societies or even Satanists in order to actually control the ley lines and maybe even to put
Yeah.
a negative frequency on them. It's very interesting because I
Hmm.
even once had a theory that maybe the Great Pyramid was used by secret societies in order to manipulate the entire Earth. Because we have theories that the Giza
Yeah.
pyramids are in the center, like the heart chakra of our planet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some esotericists were saying that the Great Pyramid was also not a tomb of a pharaoh Khufu, but was built in order to make rituals to actually have rituals in that pyramid by secret societies. And if it
Yeah.
was a heart chakra, then planting negative energy like cyclically in some astrological,
Yeah.
specific times, it may be that, like just as we could actually have our heart, dark energy in our heart, then it would go
Mhm.
everywhere. So it may be that it is about control, about
Mm.
putting us in those material physical cages, but also about, controlling negatively, maybe even the entire planet.
Yeah. Right. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I've heard of that as well with the buildings. Like there's a negative grid, and then there's the organic, not negative, like a lower frequency grid. And
Hmm.
then there is, yeah, which is probably connected to ancient, really ancient stuff. Like, I don't know if you've heard, this is a bit esoteric, or have you heard of black goo? Have you heard of that? No, okay. It's just like an ancient, well, it would probably have to do with Atlantis, and it's got to do with ancient
Mm.
technology and foreign, yeah, so a lot of kind of esoteric stuff. But the grid that is based off is, yeah, then like lower frequencies and
Mm.
all that stuff. Yeah. Oh my
Maybe,
gosh.
maybe. Okay,
Yeah.
it's getting late. Thank you
Yeah.
for our conversation. I
Yeah,
think
thank.
we were speaking for for a lot, I don't know.
Oh no,
But
that
thank
was.
you again.
No, thank you, Alexander. That was awesome. Oh my God. I have to process this now. I got a lot of downloads, or yeah, a lot of things happening there. So no, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. So we can find your book on Amazon, and
I
I'll
send
post the
you the
link.
links.
Yes, I'll post the link. All the best with the new book, because you're starting that now, right? Yeah.
I have so many ideas that I don't know which one will be published first. We will
Oh,
see,
okay.
we'll see.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll do good. All right, thank you very much, and
Thank you.
enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. I will go to sleep.
Oh, okay, it's starting. My day is starting here.
So have a nice day and a happy
Yeah.
new year to you and
Oh, yeah.
everyone listening.
Absolutely. Happy New Year, everyone, and God bless all. Thank you. Thank
Thank you.
you. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.